Hey everyone, and welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're doing what we do best, bridging those dynamic, rapidly changing current affairs directly with your static UPSC syllabus. We are absolutely not wasting a single second today. I'm going to guide you through the major exam-relevant updates from May 15th, 2026. If you're gearing up for prelims or mains, you know how crucial it is to not just read the news, but to mentally file it exactly where it belongs in your foundational concepts. So let's dive right in.
All right, here's our agenda, our syllabus matrix for the day. We're kicking off with polity and governance, then tackling disasters and internal security. After that, we'll unpack a massive economy and inflation shock and map out the latest in international relations. And of course, we'll wrap it all up with some concrete mains practice and a rapid-fire revision to lock those facts in.
Starting right off with Section 1, Polity and Governance Updates for GS Paper 2.
So the state elections just wrapped up, and it's a major political shift. With the UDF winning 102 out of 140 seats, V.D. Satisan is officially set to become the 13th Chief Minister of Kerala. Now this is huge because it ends the 10-year LDF rule under Pinarayi Vijayan. Satisan has formally staked his claim before Governor Rajendra Vishwanath Arlikar. But looking at this from a strict UPSC perspective, we really need to dig into the constitutional mechanics here. How exactly does a Chief Minister formally assume office?
Well, watch out, because here's a classic prelims trap for you. You know how UPSC loves to test your precision on terminology, right? Article 164 of the Constitution clearly states the Chief Minister shall be appointed by the governor. But here's the catch. The governor doesn't swear them in under an oath of office in the strict legal sense of the word appointing. Rather, the governor administers that oath. The swearing in itself is a constitutional convention, while the appointment is the actual constitutional mandate. Keep that subtle, tricky distinction in the back of your mind when you're analyzing those prelim statements.
Moving right along to Section 2, Disasters and Internal Security.
Shifting into GS Paper 3, we're seeing real-world tragedies testing our static disaster frameworks. Recently, unseasonal storms and lightning tragically claimed 111 lives across 26 districts in Uttar Pradesh. Now, this flow brilliantly illustrates how the Static Disaster Management Act of 2005 immediately kicks into gear. A crisis like this activates the State Disaster Management Authority, the SDMA, which is headed directly by the Chief Minister. They step in to funnel ex gratia compensation right through the State Disaster Response Fund, or SDRF. And a quick fact to remember for your exams: the SDRF funding ratio is generally maintained at 75% from the center and 25% from the state. It's also worth noting that while lightning is a top cause of weather-related deaths right now, it still isn't officially classified as a national disaster. That's a huge ongoing debate in disaster policy circles.
Now, let's pivot to internal security in the Northeast. We are closely monitoring a very tense hostage crisis in Manipur, involving members of both the Kuki and Naga communities. This ties deeply into the ethnic conflicts that have been ongoing since 2023. And whenever we deal with internal security in what are termed disturbed areas, there's a very common, very tricky prelims trap regarding the Armed Forces Special Powers Act, or ASFPA. So, the big myth here, and you'll see this all the time as a distractor in multiple choice questions, is that AFSPA grants absolute blanket immunity to the armed forces. That's just not true. The reality is that AFSPA actually requires prior central government sanction before any prosecution of armed forces personnel can even take place. Plus, keep in mind, it only applies to areas that are officially notified as disturbed under Section 3 of the Act. No blanket immunity, just a strict legal prerequisite.
Okay, let's hit Section 3, Economy and Inflation Shocks.
Global geopolitics is literally creating a massive headache for the Reserve Bank of India right now, and honestly, it's completely summed up by this staggering number, 67.2%. That is the inflation rate strictly for crude oil and natural gas, and it just hit a 46-month high in April 2026. This right here is the absolute biggest driver of the economic shockwaves we are about to look at. It is basically a massive domino effect. The US-Israeli war with Iran kicks off in late February. Because of this conflict, the Strait of Hormuz, which is a completely vital global energy choke point, gets blocked. So what happens next? A massive, immediate supply shock. Prices for crude oil and commercial LPG just spike. Naturally, this geopolitical instability causes investors to panic and pull their money out of emerging markets. This capital flight has caused the Indian rupee to depreciate by an abnormal 8.5% in just a few short months. All of this culminates in a brutal cost-push inflation scenario, driving our wholesale price index, the WPI, to more than double, hitting 8.3%.
Now, why is this such a nightmare for policymakers? Notice the massive divergence happening here. The wholesale price index has shot up to 8.3%, but the consumer price index, the CPI, is sitting comfortably at 3.48%. WPI measures production costs, while CPI measures the actual burden on retail consumers. This wide gap means producers are currently absorbing these massive fuel and power costs, and it's severely squeezing their margins. And you know that's highly unsustainable. Eventually, those costs are going to be passed down to us, the consumers. It means the CPI is essentially a ticking time bomb.
Which leads us perfectly into Section 4, International Relations and Strategic Autonomy.
This whole economic shock we just talked about, it's driven entirely by foreign conflicts, which really highlights the incredible tightrope walk of India's foreign policy. We recently saw the Trump-Xi summit over in Beijing, which is obviously a pivotal moment for global stability. They navigated the incredibly sensitive Taiwan issue, with President Xi explicitly warning it's the most important issue that could lead to conflict. But they did manage to agree on the absolute necessity of keeping the Strait of Hormuz open for energy flow. An interesting takeaway from analysts is that the U.S. seems to be treating China as if it were the China of 10 years ago, potentially underestimating the current power dynamics. And right in the middle of this massive U.S.-China triangle is India. We're continuing to balance our strategic autonomy, engaging heavily with the U.S. via the Quad security dialogue, while simultaneously serving as the U.S.'s largest trading partner.
And hey, here's another essential prelims trap for you. It was recently announced that upcoming meetings between the U.S. and China will likely happen at the APEC summit, which China is hosting. Be very, very careful here. Do not mistakenly mark India as an APEC member in your exam. India is part of the G20, we're in the Quad, and many others, but we are absolutely not a member of the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation.
All right, Section 5, Mains Practice Questions. Let's apply this.
Knowing the facts is just step one. How do we actually apply this dynamically to your mains answers? Take a look at this 15-mark GS3 question. It's asking you to analyze the exact economic situation we just discussed. This tests your ability to seamlessly connect a global oil shock to the RBI's domestic flexible inflation targeting framework. So how should we framework this answer?
Break it down like this. First, explain the significance. WPI and CPI are diverging because producers are taking the massive hit on fuel costs, compressing their margins. This severely risks a slowdown in investments. You have to mention that this will inevitably pass through to CPI with a lag. Then you hit the core of the question, the RBI's actual dilemma. The RBI's legal mandate is to keep CPI at 4%, plus or minus 2%. Right now, at 3.48%, they are technically in the safe zone, but the dilemma is brutal. If they raise the repo rate to preemptively control the coming inflation and stop capital flight, they risk completely choking domestic economic growth. But if they do nothing, the rupee just continues to depreciate. Structuring your answer around that exact real-world tension will absolutely score you top marks.
Moving to GS2, here is a classic analytical question where you must weigh India's multi-alignment strategy against intense external pressures. How do you tackle a question that touches on such a delicate geopolitical tightrope?
A top-tier answer here doesn't just blindly praise India's policy, it critically examines the friction. You need to acknowledge the immense challenges we face. U.S. pressure under Kaitsa to cut Russian oil, the heavy threat to our investments in Iran's Chabahar port due to sanctions, and really awkward diplomatic incidents, like a U.S. submarine sinking an Iranian ship in the Indian Ocean right after it attended an Indian Navy review. But then you pivot to India's strengths, emphasize how India uses the pending India-EU free trade agreement as an economic anchor, and leverages its critical position in the Quad as a vital counterweight to China. Your conclusion should be sharp. Strategic autonomy isn't a static achievement. It requires continuous day-to-day calibration and a relentless push for deeper domestic defense manufacturing.
Finally, Section 6, Rapid Fire Revision Summary. To wrap things up, let's lock in this factual ammunition you'll need for your objective papers. Honestly, take a mental screenshot right now. 111 dead in the UP storms triggering the SDRF. V.D. Sathyasen is officially the 13th Chief Minister of Kerala. WPI is spiking dangerously to 8.3%, driven by 67% crude oil inflation, while CPI temporarily lags behind at 3.4%. The rupee has depreciated by 8.5% due to capital flight. And finally, some great data we pulled from the source material regarding the latest periodic labor force survey. India's unemployment rate has actually dropped to 3% with a labor force participation rate of 59%. Use these specific numbers in your essays to show real precision.
I want to leave you with this powerful thought for your essay preparations, tying directly back to our IR discussion today. Strategic autonomy in a multipolar world is not a luxury,
It is the foundation of national sovereignty in the 21st century. Think about that for a second. How long can India truly balance these fiercely competing global powers without being forced to make a definitive choice? Keep analyzing, keep connecting those dots, and I will see you in the next explainer.
If you're ready to really practice all 8 mains questions from today's news, and you want to get your hands on prelims MCQs and detailed notes, go ahead and download the complete PDF. Just scan the QR code on your screen or use the link in the description to join our Telegram channel. Keep up the amazing work, stay consistent, and I will see you in the next explainer.